Albert Einstein once said, "Two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity." And I'm not sure about the universe. Good or bad, I don't think anyone would disagree that the United States of America is a definitive example of a capitalist economic structure. But one of the differences between this society and a lot of other consumer-driven cultures is the feeling of entitlement towards gratuities. I am Australian. In my country, the idea of tipping for goods and services has never been considered compulsory for any transaction. The price is what it is, and anything else that is given is considered a bonus for above average service. And when nothing extra is given by a customer, nothing is said by the vendor. But in America, where the minimum wage is relatively low, it is considered an insult to not provide some form of additional payment. And sometimes even not getting enough is just as offensive. But the one thing this consequence has led to is that, considering the possibility of receiving a bad tip, workers in the States go overboard with cordiality and assistance. Your meal is delivered promptly and correctly, with a smile and a name. In order to promote better public relations, workers are constantly reminded that the customer is always right. But whoever came up with this notion was actually trying to say, if you pretend that the customer is always right, you will get more money. And one rule to consider when enforcing the idea that the customer is always right is the follow-on that there are no stupid questions. But whoever came up with this idea has clearly never worked in retail. The older I get, the more I find myself being unable to suffer fools. And my personal struggle with stupid questions has gone from ignoring to politely addressing to sarcastically responding to angrily internalizing, and has most recently developed to sympathizing and sometimes worrying for the future of humanity. As a mechanical workshop owner, the customer is hardly ever right, and there are stupid questions, plenty of them. As a teacher, however, I completely suspend this belief and welcome curiosity in any form. For educational purposes, there is no such thing as a stupid question. A classroom should be considered a safe space where critical thinking and skepticism, no matter how far off topic, is something that, with the right guidance, can be steered towards a relevant answer. If I'm discussing the components in a suspension system, and a student honestly asks a seemingly silly question about braking systems, I will do what I can to either draw a comparison, give a related reason, or do something to avoid diminishing that student's search for answers. There are many things that can be done to deal with this issue, but if another student laughs or makes a derogatory remark about another student just for asking a question, I will do what I can to make that student look stupid. It seems, though, that this approach of making people look stupid is frowned upon in the world of customer service. So all my efforts are usually focused on restraining myself first and then attempting to address the issue in order to not make the customer feel stupid. Many years ago, my small workshop expanded to include a franchise dealership. Kawasaki spent a lot of money to equip my showroom with massive high-res lifestyle murals, loading the floor stock with all manner of bikes, branding and fit out specifically to appeal to motorcycle consumers, and external signage visible enough to be seen from the space station. Yet as soon as a few months after opening, I would get customers walking into my new shop and asking if this was a dealership. Initially, I chalked it up to being a new dealership, even though I thought it was pretty obvious that my shop was not a restaurant or a public library. So, considering the store's age, I didn't give it any thought, even though this happened more than once. But after a while, we got to be known in the area and online and the new side of the business was well established and running smoothly. But this didn't stop people from walking into a bike shop, being surrounded by multiples of the same new bikes in different colours, with large price tags on the windshield, being approached by a salesman and asking the question, "Do you sell bikes?" If I happened to be that salesman, I suddenly found my right hand's palm reflexively attempting to find its violent conclusion on the front of my forehead. But I quickly learned to focus that initial movement into a handshake and an introduction. Amazingly, this happened on a few occasions, and one time I ignored my inner salesman and replied, "No, this is my garage and you're trespassing." Luckily, the customer appreciated my sarcasm and admitted that it was a stupid question, considering he put himself in this situation, and it ended up being a decent icebreaker. Phone conversations are a bit tricky, and I think it's because there's no physical presence or eye contact. When someone calls the shop, I answer by saying, "Morning flywheels." It's just my standard response. And for first-time customers, sometimes they need further clarification. "Yeah, hi, is this a workshop?" And that's fine. You can't see the place over the phone. You obviously haven't been to the website, so that's understandable. Some people even call to ask if we fix bikes, and I let it go and just answer the question because I know that if I say yes, there will be a follow-up question that usually explains why they had to ask the obvious one. Like, "I wasn't sure if you just sold them or rented them," etc. But the one that gets me every time is so surreal because it even bypasses the obvious. I know it's strange to say that, but here's what happens. And again, you don't want to know how often. "Ring ring, morning flywheels." "Yeah, hi, is this flywheels?" Now, of course the immediate response should be yes, how can I help? I used to do it, I see my staff do it, it's the only obvious correct answer. By no means do I claim to be some kind of genius, but I'm 45 now, and I struggle to deal with what should be an honest and easy thing. So I pause. It usually takes 3 seconds of silence. Anything shorter than that, and I'm forgiving any form of foolishness on the part of the customer in order to satisfy a further conversation. Anything longer than that, and the silence becomes awkward and the customer actually questions if they do have the right number. But during this period of quiet reflection, I'm thinking to myself, you needed something. You did the research, you found what you were looking for, and you dialed the correct number. And when someone answered the phone, the response confirmed that you, in fact, achieved your goal, and you're talking to the people who can help you. Yet you still need further evidence that what you are doing is accurate. So after my 3-second mental struggle, I usually say, yes. One time it happened, and the voice just had such a resemblance to a poor lost sheep, and my 3-second battle took a different path. Again, there was a violation of information to be processed. You got any charges? Ring ring, morning flywheels. Oh yeah, hi, is this flywheels? After the pause, I ended up saying, no. Oh, okay, thanks. The customer hung up. I turned to my apprentice who was staring at me and said, I have so many questions about what just happened. Then the phone rang again. Ring ring, surely not. Morning flywheels. Oh yeah, hi, is this flywheels? Okay, it's the same guy. I really can't do my usual pause. It's not fair. Just smile and say, yes. Now this customer went on to book his bike in, and it turned out to be a completely normal transaction. But the whole time I was working on his bike, my actions were still typical for that kind of job, yet they came with their own internal monologue. I ended up getting rid of the showroom and the stress and just focusing on my real love back in the workshop. But the death of the sales department was by no means the end of the stupid questions. The workshop has always enjoyed its share of foolishness. For example, you would not believe how often this one happens. I'm in the middle of my workshop, surrounded by bikes in various forms of disrepair, wearing gloves, standing next to a hoist with the bike raised up, usually some form of grease smudged on my face, usually my chin for some reason, screwdriver in one hand, spanner in the other, literally manipulating and repairing a half-naked bike. And a customer will walk straight up to me and ask, do you fix bikes? Now, this is not someone standing in a pristine showroom full of new smells. This is not a phone call. I might be able to forgive this question under those circumstances, but here, there is someone standing in front of me while I'm in a mechanical workshop fixing a bike, asking me if I fix bikes. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, really? Obviously, we've never met before, and that's the way you're choosing to start this relationship? Because I don't know these people. To verbalize anything that I'm thinking would actually be quite rude. I just always say yes, and they seem to move on to the next question without considering the gravity of what just happened. I can make excuses for the silly phone question. I can even make concessions for the silly sales room question, but this one, there's really only one thing I'm morally allowed to say, and that's yes. Because consider the same circumstances. I'm inside what's clearly a mechanical workshop, halfway into building an engine, and someone asks, do you fix bikes here? If I say no, that conversation is over. But there is one question that has given me mixed reactions over the years. I used to be surprised whenever it was asked, but over time and careful consideration, I've come to accept it as a professional curiosity based on a customer's need to bond with their service provider on some level, in order to either make them feel more comfortable, to hand over their pride and joy, or merely just to gauge my personal tastes compared to theirs. For example, if I was visiting a new dentist and I asked him what toothpaste I should use, and he recommends Hello Kids Magical Mermaid toothpaste, I would have some concerns about his qualification. But this is generally not the reason customers want to know what their mechanic's favorite bike is. Would a mechanic choose a bike based on its mechanical reliability? What about price? What about speed? What about looks? So when a customer asks what bike I ride, what are they actually asking me? Are they asking what bike they should get to keep costs down? Or are they asking if I like a bike that they approve of, so the job that I do on their bike will be satisfactory? Why would I do a good job on a bike that I don't like? The fact is, the machine is never the problem, and there's no disputing taste. So what kind of bike I like has nothing to do with the value that I can offer my customer. And I know that this is the question that my customers really want to know because of how often it is put to me. But it's always done the wrong way. There I am again, in my zone, working on a bike, on one of 3 hoists. Most of them pulled apart vehicles in my shop are there out of necessity, and as such all still have valid registration plates. Yet no matter what I happen to be doing to any particular bike, someone will walk up to me and ask, "Is this your bike?" As an apprentice, when this first started happening, I was always shocked. I was clearly an apprentice who couldn't afford a set of tyres for any of these bikes. Yet there was an assumption, regardless of the fact that I'm at work during work hours, that the vehicle I was working on was mine. I thought this was so strange. But it seemed to keep happening. Over the years, the surprise wore off, and I just thought it was funny and would have a little chuckle at the customer's expense, and they always realized it was all in good fun. Years ago, though, I really started to question the question. Imagine you walk onto a construction site. Somehow you make it past all the clearly labelled fencing, approach a man who is wearing a high-vis vest and a hard hat, sweeping up sawdust, and ask him if this is his house. I mean, considering the environment, that is a stupid question. If a bike mechanic has enough time during the day to fix his own bike, he's obviously not a good enough mechanic to be fixing everyone else's. Once I realized the absurdity within the question, it became obvious what they really want to know. So I say no, in order to lead them to the actual question, when they say, "What do you ride?" Now that is a fair question. I don't think I've ever seen a tattoo artist who does not have any tattoos. And if I wanted a tattoo, and the artist came out with skin as bare as a newborn baby, I would have some legitimate concerns as to the taste of the artist, and therefore, justifiably or not, draw my own conclusion about their skill level. Now I am at a point in my career where I don't actually care what conclusions people draw about my work. I have nothing to prove, so I don't need their approval, and I'm happy to share the love. Just like a builder's house is never finished, a mechanic's bike doesn't get fixed because no one's paying him to do it. So I point to the bike in the corner under a cover of dust and say, "Honda Blackbird." In the early 90s, there was a recognition that the world's fastest production bike was held by sports touring bikes that weren't quite deserving of the title. Their technology and aesthetics were dated. The global economy was strong, and this was a category of motorcycles that had been recently overlooked. So in the mid-90s there was a push to do something special. In 1997, Honda released the CBR 1100 XX Super Blackbird. This was inspired by the Lockheed SR-71 reconnaissance jet that could fly higher and faster than anything available at the time. The statistics on this plane are truly outstanding, and the aerodynamics are a thing of beauty. And so Honda produced a bike with the same looks and premise. Technology, aesthetics, comfort, and a gauge on the dash that topped out at 330 kilometers an hour. It was a quick success, and I feel the overall package has stood the test of time. I've owned mine since the year 2000 and just can't bring myself to get rid of it. It was a poster on my bedroom wall, and it was the bike that made me want to be a mechanic. 2 years later, however, Suzuki comes along and says we can do it better with the release of the GSX1300. As we all know, there's no replacement for displacement, so they made their sports tourer bigger, heavier, rounder, and 340 kilometers an hour. And so, the larger capacity Suzuki steals the title of world's fastest production bike from the prolific Honda Blackbird, a title which it held for many years until the release of the Kawasaki ZX14R. But the real kicker to all us die-hard Blackbird fans is that they named it the Hayabusa. This translates to the peregrine falcon, the fastest animal on a planet, a Japanese bird of prey that can dive at 200 kilometers an hour and likes to eat blackbirds. Mel Brooks once said, "Bad taste is simply saying the truth before it should be said." The owner of the bike in this video has been a regular customer of mine for well over a decade. I've seen him go from early gen Hayabusa to late model Kawasaki ZX14 and back to the third gen of the Blackbird killer. And each time we meet, even though he knows that I will always strive to do the best thing for his bike, there is an unspoken agreement between us that although his bike's performance statistics dwarf my bike's output, and his bike is considered by many to be technically better and certainly more modern, we both understand this, and he constantly reminds me of it, and regardless, I will always prefer my bird to his Busa. Thanks for watching. Stay upright.